Welcome to the Industry 4.0 Club's Fireside Chat. The club's purpose is to engage the power of diverse worldwide talent to accelerate the global evolution to Industry 4.0. We accomplish this by hosting and supporting respectful, thoughtful, and interdisciplinary open conversations and creating quality content on wide-ranging Industry 4.0 topics to expand the reach of our community. My name is Mike Unger, and I'm the CEO of the Industry 4.0 Club. I have over 40 years of leadership and experience, with most of that experience in manufacturing at Michelin. I'm joined today by my co-host, Mike Yost. Mike, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Mike. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Yost. I am the chairman of the Industry 4.0 Club and one of the co-founders. Have been in industry for the last 35 years, with the vast majority of the time spent trying to help in this type of dialogue about helping people figure out the value and the fit and the role of technology in manufacturing operations. So happy to be here today.
Thanks, Mike. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by David Arians. He's the author of the IT/OT Insider and a manager at Analytics for Industry. Our broadcast today is entitled The IT/OT Convergence, a Recipe of Digitalization Success. David is joining us from Antwerp, Belgium. He holds a master's degree in mathematical engineering from KU Leuven. He was previously the industrial digitalization director at BSAF Antwerp, where he focused on building digital product teams and sound cybersecurity practices. Today, he leads analytics for industry and is an advisor to TimeSeer.ai. His focus today is on IT/OT convergence and designing operational data platforms for his clients. He publishes the IT/OT Insider with Willem van Lammeren. So welcome, David. We're glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So David, our audience, so they can get to know you a little bit. I mentioned that you had a master's in mathematics. How did you go from being a master in mathematics to becoming an IT/OT expert in IT/OT convergence?
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's an interesting story. So in my last year, when I was finishing my master's degree, I got passionate about model predictive control (MPC), at that time, of course, no industry experience yet. And my thesis, my master thesis, was around an implementation of model predictive control in the chemical industry. And at that time, I got to know somebody who then later turned out to become my boss at BASF, and he offered me a job. I started at BASF I would say as a data scientist, but at that time, the naming data scientist didn't exist yet. So I was just that guy doing stuff with mathematics. And then, after a couple of years, I got passionate about cybersecurity. So I started implementing BASF's global industrial cybersecurity program. I started in 2010. That's the same year as the year that Stuxnet hit the world. So that's also when manufacturing companies, chemical process companies, they became a bit anxious, and they went like, "Can this happen to us as well?" So that's about that time frame. So then I first started within, I would say, cybersecurity, and then I got the availability to lead BASF's industrial digitalization team. So yeah, that's how I ended up coming, I would say, into the IT/OT world. First from a cybersecurity data perspective, then more from a systems perspective, and now actually again from a data perspective. So yeah.
That's quite a journey. That's wonderful. No, I think it's always fascinating when we talk to folks on the Fireside Chat that where they start in terms of their education is not normally where they're working 10, 15, 20 years out. And I think it's always an interesting thing for folks to realize that the job that they have today won't be the job that they have tomorrow. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, you also see this domain changing so fast, where I've always been very close to the more, I would say, to the SCADA DCS side of things. Mm-hmm. I've never actually worked within that domain, but I was always very close to these colleagues. And what I see, if I just look back 10, 15 years ago to what we are doing right now within the IT OT domain, the data domain, also now with the advent of, maybe the popularization of artificial intelligence, because I'm happy to say that I've been doing AI things also already 15 years ago, but now this becoming so popular, you see this domain is getting quite some traction, and that's why I love being being inside it.
Yeah, David, if I could ask, the conversation around IT OT convergence, right? It has both a technology meaning and an organizational meaning, right? It applies to organizations as well as the technology approach. Do you see it, or have you seen it throughout the course of your career, being more on one side than the other, and has that changed at all over the time you've been working?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the discussion has to be an organizational, cultural discussion, and not a technology focused one. But having said that, we are talking about IT/OT convergence now for a decade or so, and it's always been a technological driven conversation we had. So here's a new tool, here is something fancy. The cloud is now available. We can also use a cloud in manufacturing or in the process industry. So it was always like a technological first discussion, a technology push. It's also how I would say manufacturers, vendors. I'm now not with the end customer anymore. I switched towards the vendor side. I'm indeed managing analytics for industry, which is a brand company under the Aviva Select umbrella. So I'm definitely on the vendor side now. But what I see is that technologies are always like, here is something new and fancy, and we're gonna try to sell that into organizations. What I believe is that because of the importance of having, I would say, ways of working adapted to this new world, this should come first. And if that doesn't come first, then the technology initiative is going to fail. And I've seen it over and over again, where things are getting pushed, the organization is not ready, it fails, and then it's because of the technology. But that's not right. It's because of the organization.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's great insights for sure. I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you, maybe you can jump to thinking about go back to the organization. I'm a big Simon Sinek fan, and I know you've thought about this as well, but as you know, he wrote the book Start with the Why. And I'm real curious to get your insights into how do we describe, when it comes to digitalization, this idea of why, what, and how?
Yeah, absolutely. I also love his books. And if I take a step back and I look to, I would say, the times where we had where we did good projects, where we had a good management buy-in, where we had our users lined up, where we actually had users who wanted to, I would say, who were on the pull side. So they wanted to get certain solutions. It was always because we didn't start with the what, with the technology. We always started with the why. And I have a diagram. Maybe you can put it on the screen, Mike. Which the readers can find it on my blog on itotinsider.com with all the, I would say, the comments. But this one shows, I would say, let's call it the tension or the span between the why on the left side and the what on the right side. So the things we all feel very comfortable is the what. We want to talk AI, we want to talk data platforms and cloud and edge solutions and unified namespace, and you name it. So all the, I would say, the very interesting technology-focused things. So as engineers, we like technology, but also our vendors like to sell us this technology. Now, on the right one, the right side. Now, your management team, your board, your shareholders, actually, from a company, they live at the left side of this diagram. They live in the why. Because in the end, it's about money, increasing profits. It's about ensuring license to operate. And it's also about, I would say, finding and keeping talent. Finding and you need to somehow find people and keep them within your organization. And those three things, these are the things your management teams, the board, shareholders should be concerned about. Now, if you then take one step deeper, I would say in the area where we are living in, we can definitely help increasing profits because we can really work towards optimal operations or towards flexible operating models, maybe even towards some kind of a futuristic lights out factory, which already happens in certain industries. We can also make sure that we help to somehow speed up learning or capture knowledge, these types of things. And definitely, we already quickly or briefly mentioned cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is not the only thing you need to ensure your license to operate. Sustainability is getting more and more important as well. So this is where the board lives, where the shareholders live. And what we try to do, especially with the content on the IT/OT Insider, is we try to connect the green part, the Y part, with the red part. And that's the how. And the how is, I think, which is the most important part, but it's also the most difficult one. Because here, now we're starting to talk about ways of working. We're starting to talk about how organizations behave. We started to talk, for example, about how can we embed an innovation mindset in companies. Typically, I would say in the manufacturing and the process industry,
Yes.
companies are typically, they are very good in doing the same thing over and over again. They're typically not really good in innovating, right? So how do you connect those dots? That's really important.
Yes. No, thank you for that. That's a very interesting model. Mike, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. Sorry. Your audience, do you find your audience is more in the green or in the red, or are you getting a combination of both?
That's a good question. I asked myself that question a couple of weeks ago, and if I take a look to the audience, which is it's difficult to get a perfect segmentation of your audience, but I would say that I have let's say 25% or so. They are, I would say, real engineers. They love to live in the what side, but they know that they have to somehow inspire their management or maybe not even inspire, but persuade their management to do certain things. I would say 25% are people who are on a management, on a senior or an exec level. 25% are vendors. So this is now really interesting because the feedback it's always really cool because when I write about stuff, I always get messages of vendors going like, yeah, but we have a solution for this and we have a solution for that. And I go like, yeah, great. But the point is not that you have a solution. The point is how can you actually connect all the dots? And then 25% of, I would say, just random people where I go like, okay, good that you're interested in my content, but I don't really know where you're at in the organization. But yeah, and also you also see how people engage with the content. So we have quite some articles which are really focused more on the left side of this diagram. And then we are engaging with a certain audience. And when we write stuff more on the right side, we're actually engaging with a totally different audience. So that's really cool.
I think it's really important. And I don't think a lot of people understand that nuance. They talk with a broad conversation with messages that resonate for different audiences and don't resonate with others. And it really does impact, whether you're looking at how versus why, you're looking at a plant level versus a business level, right? Those are different discussions, all very valuable, all part of this conversation. And it's really hard to serve everybody with, one piece of content.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just a quick aside, if I can, I wanted to mention to our listeners on LinkedIn that if you like to pose a question to David or to any of us, you're welcome to put that in the comment box on LinkedIn, and we'll get it, and we'll have a chance to to talk about it during the broadcast. So thank you for that. So this is I love the model. I mean, I think it really clarifies a lot of understanding about the different perspectives that the different stakeholders have in really digitalization. So I really appreciate that a lot. I also wanted to maybe turn our attention for a second to company culture and talk about culture for a moment. What are some of the fundamental elements that you've seen in a company culture that lay the groundwork for successful IT/OT convergence? I think that's another question about that, because I think it's so we know about the why and the what, and those are important things to kind of perspective. But without a good culture, I've seen more failures of initiatives than you can just imagine. So maybe you could comment a little bit on that.
Absolutely. Let me start with the reasons why I see these types of activities at corporation or convergence failing. Because I think it's important to take one step back, see why these things fail, learn from those failures, and then see okay, what are the things we can do differently. And one of the I lifted myself, but it's what I call applying Industry 2.0 thinking to Industry 4.0 problems. I already briefly touched that point a couple of minutes ago, but organizations, especially bigger organizations, they are machines. They are the only reason why you worked at Michelin, Mike. The only reason why Michelin survives is because it's able to produce tires at breakneck speeds, at a certain quality level, but in any case, they produce as much tires as they can to start to stay competitive. Mm-hmm. If you generalize that towards the industry, is that, and that's why I call that applying Industry 2.0 thinking to 4.0 problems, is that your typical management teams, they are used to think in we are the leadership, we know best. There's a certain hierarchy. It's still the time of Henry Ford and you name it, right? So what I see happening is that if you start innovation projects, then somehow you need to make sure that you are able to have this innovative thinking embedded somehow in a company. But the company still needs to be able to produce. So you have this tension between
Yes.
two.
Well,
and one of the I would say one of the, it's not really a model, but in any case, one of the things we wrote about is that divergence happens quicker than convergence. And here again is maybe one of the slides you can share, is that what you typically see is that, especially in our domain, you have the IT groups, the OT groups. Now, we can actually generalize OT also to operations in general. So you have I would say the silo who reports to the CIO, and you have the silo who reports to the COO, typically. Maybe via, but in any case, you have the CIO silo and the COO silo. In many organizations, engineering is part of the COO silo, but in some it's also part of an R&D organization. But in any case, mostly it's those two blocks. And what you see is that when you start and we work in silos because there is no trust, you hear that so many times when you talk to people from one of the other side. And I'm not saying that IT is better than OT or vice versa, but you hear saying like, yeah, but the other side, they don't understand, right? For some reason, because somebody from operations says, yeah, but they from IT, they never visit the plant, so they don't know how manufacturing or process looks like.
Right.
And IT, they go like, yeah, but they have all technology, or they are not organizing themselves as they should be. So what you typically see is this is the starting position in most organizations. And then you have this, there is a mandate to do stuff around digitalization. And that means that typically one side will start claiming the other. And in many cases today, it's IT who is starting to claim, I would say, a part of the operations OT organization. Why? Because today most questions start from data, artificial intelligence, data platforms. IT is typically the owner of data platforms. Now, okay, this is already for next week, but next week we want to talk really about data. Now, there are a lot of things to say, but typically we see that IT starts, and there is this, they claim a portion. And what you see is these statements like, we know better, our technology is newer, etc., etc. But the result is then mistrust. It's basically the organizations diverge even further from each other.
Mike, it looks like there's some questions from the audience here.
I was going to jump on that, Mike.
Yeah.
Do you want to have another question first, or you want to jump in?
No. I was gonna point to Herman's question. If
let's go ahead.
So Herman asks, what about engineering technology in this conversation, in this journey? Is it not a triangle that includes the engineering technology? And so, do you get pressed with that? How does this fit into your conversations, David?
Yeah, it's a very good one. You could even argue that you have IT, OT, the business, and engineering. So there are quite a lot of, I would say, variations on this theme. Now, the interesting thing here is that I would say, as I said, in many organizations, I see engineering more as part of the operations sides. So let's, in this diagram, for the sake of the discussion, generalize OT to operations. So I see that quite a lot. I also see that engineering in many organizations is very closely connected to the operations silo, and they typically work together very well. Now, there is also a downside here, is that your engineering organization is really used. They follow processes depending on the industry. Some are fast, some are really, really lengthy. If engineering designs and builds something, it's an extension to a plant, I would say Big Bang DCS migration, a new line, a new plant, greenfield, whatever. They do that very thoroughly. So I would say most engineering organizations, they apply a waterfall way of working, waterfall way of thinking. Everything gets tested, gets simulated, etc., etc. Big problem here is that in the more IT/OT side of things, and definitely on the IT side, I would say the way we are going to solve a problem typically is, I would say, in the beginning, not known to us. We need to figure that out while we are taking steps. We want to focus on a certain outcome, but we don't really want to focus on the path towards that outcome. So what I see is that to summarize, while engineering technology could indeed be seen as a third circle, I think what is better is that we take a step back, take a look at it from a use case perspective, and say, okay, for this use case, we're working between operations and IT, but you can draw the same diagram for a certain use case between engineering and IT, or engineering and operations. And then it becomes a bit, I would say, more simple to explain. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Yeah, I would just comment that the last question on there was, is it not a triangle? And I think the argument absolutely could be made, right? Because there's certainly, from a message perspective and a vision perspective, we're talking digital thread, we're talking model-based engineering, model-based design, and it seems as the engineering and design side of things should easily flow into the operations world, and but the reality is, I think there's a lot there that's still very visionary, and I think there's a lot there that's still culturally, organizationally, the worlds struggle to work together. So
just one simple thing here is, for example, master data management. Yep. That's we can talk an hour about master data management.
Oh, sure.
But that's already like a point where there are quite some discussions and there are so many tools available. But if you look to many organizations, the way they deal with master data management is in many cases still very siloed.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to throw up also this question we received from Shreen, and I'm not sure, Shreen Avesi, I hope I didn't mispronounce your name, sir. But as the industry has heterogeneous systems, is it possible to create general solutions? If so, how? I don't. Does that question resonate with you, David?
Yeah. There is it is extremely important to have, I would say, some standardization in place, because standardization leads to scaling, right? You can't reinvent the wheel for everything you do. The question is, at which level do you start standardization? I see the IT/OT zone as the perfect place to start standardization. I would say at a certain level, depending on your maturity, depending on your industry. But you really need to accept these heterogeneous systems on your backend, different vendors, different versions. But many industries, especially in the manufacturing industry, they really live by mergers and acquisitions, right? So even if you would do some kind of a project to standardize, you know what, let's throw out all our PLCs from vendor A and we're going to switch to vendor B. Vendor B is going to be really happy. But in a month or 2 months or so, while you're still in that project, well, no, you haven't even started that project, right? It's still an idea. But then the board comes up with a new acquisition, and then suddenly you're facing vendor C as well. So you need to accept that it will always be part of our industry. Now, the more you, I would say, get higher in the Purdue model, whatever, but the more you go from lines and plans to integrated systems, to your MES layer, to your data platform layer. I'm not using the word historian anymore, because I don't think an historian is the solution. It's always a combination of different components. But the more you go towards your data platform layer, you do need standardization, and you do want to make sure that users of that data, either in your operations environment or within R&D, or people who are running AI models or data scientists and so on, they can actually start making sense of that data. So the higher you go, I would say, in your systems, in your Purdue model, the more you need to standardize, in my opinion.
And I would just piggyback on that and say that the value add, or the ability to have focused solutions does come into play the higher up you go, and the value add that you are delivering, right? A lot of the applications that exist today in manufacturing have to do a lot of the same plumbing. So they're connecting and to the same machines, and they're storing it themselves, multiple systems that are doing a whole lot of infrastructure from a data perspective that is really not value add. It's necessary to have the data and then to provide the specific functions on top of it. So there's a lot of work underway nowadays from a data platform perspective and a collection and modeling perspective, so that you can get to the point where the focus is on the true differentiation with a common data platform underneath it. So, David, I did have one question I wanted to throw at you before we come to the end here. I was part of a nonprofit back in the early 2000s, and in our 2008 annual conference, we had proposed the theme of convergence. We weren't calling it OT back then, but talking about this topic of IT/OT convergence, we had proposed it as the theme for the annual conference, and the board shot that down because they said it's 2008. Nobody wants to talk about convergence nowadays. That's old. That's passé. So, your reaction? Is this still a relevant issue for folks?
Yeah, I think I have to stop my work now. Delete the
website. Right.
Oh no, absolutely. And I heard that so many times before. Now, actually, I didn't hear that in 2008. So your management team at that time was really one of probably one of the first who were saying that.
It was a nonprofit group of solution providers. So yeah,
but it's absolutely, yes. So I would say IT/OT convergence is more or less the same age as Industry 4.0 type of words or high or the I 4.0 hype. what I see is that when I take a look back 10 years or so, IT/OT convergence was, in my opinion, primarily driven by cybersecurity. And if you take one step deeper, by the need to connect devices. So when people talked about converging IT and OT, it was typically about connecting a wire and then securing the data which flowed through that wire. What I then saw was, security became in the beginning. It was really driven by operations needs, but then IT also came in, which definitely makes sense because I think cybersecurity needs to be owned by the CISO, by the IT organization, or if you have a separate organization, definitely it should be there. But you also need people from the operation side who really understand the industrial protocols. And what I saw was a bit, I would say, the concept around IT/OT conversion became, I would say, more common in certain companies, and in others, definitely not. Others, they just kept on fighting. What I see happening right now is with the data platform thing being hot and trendy, the cloud coming in, artificial intelligence, etc., is that IT/OT convergence becomes again something which is crucial to take those steps. And I'm using the word data convergence actually more than I do with IT/OT convergence. So for me today, IT/OT convergence is equal to data convergence, and data convergence is needed to scale your data-driven initiatives.
Right.
So it is super relevant, and I'm talking to quite a lot of organizations, and what I can see today is that most organizations, they still live in their silos. So
I
yeah,
hear that.
it is really relevant.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So just for the group, we've been talking for about a half an hour now with David Arians from the IT/OT Insider. He's joining us from Antwerp, Belgium, so we're glad to have him. And we're talking about really this idea of how do we create digitalization success. So one of the things that a lot of companies have been on this journey. Mike, you shared 2008. I mean, it's 16 years now. Holy cow! But how long does it take to bring organizations like IT and OT together? And if a company's out, quote unquote, on that journey, and we were talking about this earlier, how do they accelerate that journey? What are some things they can do?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Does it take? Well, it doesn't take months. It takes years. But it's so dependent on your, I would say, your management, the buy-in from your management, the mandate you get from your management teams, and the fact that they understand that the way you work within that data convergence teams, those innovation teams, it's different than the way you operate at plants. And what me and Willem, my co-writer, co-founder of the blog, what we did in the last years is we actually took a look over the fence, over the wall, to IT, because we sometimes think that we are unique with the challenges we have, but that's not right. Because if you go back in time 15, 20 years, for some companies 10 years, IT was actually facing very similar dilemmas. At that point in time, within IT, you had a development silo and you had an operations, an infrastructure silo. And they also didn't work together. And that also created quite a lot of fuss and quite a lot of problems. Now, there was one thing which made it a little bit easier, is because they both reported to the CIO. So they had, I would say, one reporting line less, but okay. And what actually changed those ways of working was, for example, the advent of DevOps, which really turned the entire IT world upside down. Later on, there were also concepts, for example, something called team topologies was also introduced in the IT world. And for those who are interested, on my blog, you find a library, and there are very, very good books you can You can read if you want to know more about these topics. But
Mhm.
so we borrowed those topics, and so because we saw the parallels, but also a couple of differences, we used those and we converted them into models which we believe work in the IT versus OT world. And they are really simple. They are also, it's not rocket science, but it is something where I think we really need to understand that we need to take those best practices and adapt them. If you want to share my screen again, I've multiple models, but here are two very simple models, and that is what is the easiest way you can start collaborating between two groups. In this case, it's IT and OT, but it could also be development and operations in the IT world, is to start with some kind of a liaison, somebody who makes the bridge. That means somebody in the IT organization who is, I would say, the counterpart for OT problems and vice versa. Now, that's what we call facilitation. Facilitation is something which is really easy. I've seen, for example, companies who they assign an IT architect and an OT architect, and those two architects, they need to work together, and they need to make sure that they come up with architectures, with designs who work for both sides. So because they understand both sides, but they also need to work together. So facilitation is one of these very easy to implement models. And once that starts growing, what you could do is to form a temporary project team. Now, it's actually an innovation team. It's a team of people with shared resources and dedicated resources. Shared resources means people who are working in the OT side, on the OT side, and people who are working on the IT side. They come together, and you add some people who are maybe dedicated to the team as well. But the shared part is really important, because you want to have the input from both sides, right?
Mhm.
They come together in a temporary fashion, because this is really important, because this model is only to, I would say, understand how cooperation can be possible, but this is not a model you can keep on running for multiple years.
Right.
And then, depending on how that goes, you could start forming more definite teams within the IT or OT side, or maybe even bring IT and OT closely together. I don't really think that having a full convergence of IT and OT on top of each other is typically not going to work, in my
Right.
opinion.
Right. It's a lot. Hey, we have one question from Srinivasa. His question was, what are the key metrics to measure the success of convergence? That's an interesting question.
That's an interesting one.
And really, do you need to measure it? I guess you can,
Yeah.
but what does that look like?
What I would say is that we need to be cautious on introducing metrics, as I would say, typical management metrics. They are, again, in my opinion, a concept from the past. But you could start tracking outcomes, and I think that makes more sense. So what are possible outcomes? A possible outcome can be, for example, the time it takes if you want to connect a new device, an IoT device, a sensor on the shop floor.
Yes.
If you wanna implement a new interface or something like that, how long does it take for your user to be happy? Right? Because that is actually what this is all about, right? It's about creating happy users, and happy users are typically happy when they get a fast solution, which is running stable and good and whatever. So one of the outcomes you could be tracking is how long does it take to achieve something, right? And what you would see is that typically when you start from this silo organization, so especially my first years at BASF, it took, just to order a virtual server, it took me 6 months. Now, the time, I would say, passed by, and that became shorter and shorter and shorter. Now, the 6 months was only for the virtual server. This was, and then you needed the firewall change, and you needed another firewall change, and you needed yet another firewall change. So tracking that lead time, but also tracking, I would say, the time towards an outcome might be something which makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
What I would also do somehow is I would say to track shared ways of working. That's a bit more difficult, but to somehow have a way where you see like, okay, the way we work together is getting closer and closer to each other. But I don't really have a good, I would say, a
Right.
good metric for that as well.
Well, thanks, David. That's some insightful reflections on the indicators. That's great. As we get to the end here, I guess we want to kind of wrap up, and we've been talking for about 40 minutes. Maybe Mike, you'll share a final thought for our audience.
Sure,
David.
absolutely, and maybe I'll tie it with the question there about metrics and such. And I think David talked about Industry 4.0 mindset and thinking versus the old way of architecting and solving problems. And I think that's a really crucial point, right? How we think about what's possible today should be a lot more free and empowering, as we have all sorts of new tools and technologies and such to get information and be connected with our supply chain, be connected with our customers, et cetera. So I would say from a metrics perspective, if we're looking toward those business outcomes that David talked about earlier, are you able to innovate faster? Are you able to serve your clients better? Are you have a better feel of your supply chain connectivity and responsiveness and agility and things like that? To me, those are markers that say you're able to then connect in with the plant side of the world in order to be responsive and adaptive and sustainable and financially profitable, et cetera. So my long way of saying that I think the idea of what is possible today in an Industry 4.0 setting from a mindset perspective is really crucial and the main takeaway I'll take from today.
Thank you, Mike. David, any final thought for our audience?
Yeah, it's how do you, I would say, expand on your ideas? How do you expand? We call it on the blog, expand the box. It's not about taking over one domain or the other, but how do you collaborate to create more?
Yes.
And this is really interesting because if you take it from that point of view, it's not one against the other, but it's how can we together create more? Then these discussions become really interesting on a board level, and I think you can also, I would say, reduce the tension a bit.
Great. No, thank you for that. So we're getting ready to wrap up. Those are some great reflections as we wrap up here. So David, I want to thank you for joining us for this insightful discussion. And for the audience, we're going to connect back up with David next week at the same time to talk about data platforms. So David, can you give us a little insight into what we might hear about next week before we wrap up?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is my second, I would say, well, not love, but in any case, second interest. It's how do I would say, scale data initiatives from the shop floor to, I would say maybe endless possibilities. Because what I typically see is the more devices you connect to systems, the more users, the more applications. What you typically see in many organizations is that data-driven initiatives, they start slowing down. So if I have today two data scientists and tomorrow I have 4, I would expect to have twice as many return. But in many organizations, that doesn't really happen. So what I want to talk today, what I want to talk about next week, not today, is what is an operational data platform? How is it different, I would say, from a more IT-related data platform? How do you contextualize data? How do you improve data quality? And finally, also, how do we see those two worlds, again, converging today and in the years to come? So has to be, I think it's going to be really, really interesting as well.
Thanks, David. So I also wanted just to share with our audience, if you're interested in David's blog, you can catch up with it here at the itotinsider.com. So people can go there and they can sign up, subscribe. Yes, David, for your newsletter?
Absolutely. I have a Substack. You can subscribe to that. And then you get an email every time we publish a new article. It's typically once a week, but now it's summer here. And in the summer, I take a bit more time to relax and to read stuff. So it's typically once a week. And if you're interested, we also have a podcast, which is complementary to the blog.
Fantastic. So we really appreciate that. We'd like to invite our listeners to participate in future broadcasts that'll be created here with the Industry 4.0 Club. So if you're interested in doing that, please reach out to us on our website, www.industry40club.com. We'd be glad to hear from you. We really like to engage with a broad audience in our conversations. So the Industry 4.0 Club hosts conversations on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, typically, alternating topics around themes like women in manufacturing, the future of manufacturing, a fireside chat like we've had today, and people, process, and culture. Again, I want to thank David and Mike for their time today and encourage you to join us next week for our next fireside chat with David and Mike as well. Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of the day and a good rest of the week.
Thanks, everybody.